So you're very welcome along. This is our end of June webinar. So Richard's in the lovely setting in Glasshouse there, and I'm in the office here, which is not quite as lovely, but not too warm in there either. Richard, I'd say, is it?
It's very pleasant. Certainly better than being out in the rain at the moment. A
Yeah.
good day to be in a webinar when it's raining outside.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so what I wanted to talk about, Richard, is obviously very happy for anyone to pop any questions that they have into the chat at any point, and we'll get to those as they pop up as well. But want to talk a little bit about like what's doing well and what's not doing so well this year in the garden, maybe, and maybe talk about if they're not, well, why they're doing well and not well at this stage. Maybe to talk a little bit about the impact of the weather over the last month in particular, because obviously we've come out of a very dry spell and then into a sort of fairly wet period as well. And I was thinking it might be useful because I noticed on my own potatoes last night at home starting to see some blight on the leaves. So I thought we might start with that as a topic, and also, while things are starting to take off a bit from a growing perspective, also the problems with pests maybe are starting to take off as well. So maybe look at some of the key pests that you have and the different methods we use to deal with them. So maybe if we just start with the kind of, what's doing well and not so well this year, and why you think that is, Richard.
Yeah, the crops that like a traditional Irish climate through May are doing badly. Onions last year had a phenomenal crop because the weather was perfect for them, in that we had plenty of moisture and not too high temperatures earlier in the year, and then it went through to a hot, dry summer later on, which is when they're drying off. They really didn't like the hot, dry weather in May, so they'll be a lot smaller than last year. Peas, I rotivated them in actually after taking what crop was on them and turning it into a bit of a salad crop, because they hate hot weather. They love a traditional Irish climate. And then doing well, as you expect, the things that like it hot, like French beans, courgettes, the tunnel crops like tomatoes, cucumbers, aubergines, they're all doing really well. So there's always a good year for some things and a bad year for others. It's the nature of it, really. And we do live in a variable, it's always been variable climate in Ireland, but with the climate emergency, it's getting worse. And you have to be philosophical as a grower, really. You do all you can to get all your crops off, but grow a range of things, and some things will work, some things will work less well,
Yeah, I find at home it hasn't been good for potatoes. I've been kind of harvesting the first new potatoes for the last couple of days, and they seem very small. Is that, I suspect it's because I didn't water them enough during the dry weather. Would that be for?
Very much so, yeah. The potatoes like it cool and damp.
Yeah.
So does blight that kills potatoes. So there you go. But I remember I got trickle irrigation on the ones here. I actually put trickle irrigation on overnight, which was to keep water off the leaves because of the encouragement of blight. And I absolutely soaked the ground up. And that's had a really good effect, and also controlling scab, which is it's more a visual thing, but it's lovely when your new potatoes, the skin slides off under the pressure of your thumb, with scab, they tend to be a bit superficially damaged. So that's kept them clean as well. So I only watered them once, but had the trickle irrigation on overnight, and it's really soaked the ground up. And that's made the difference. I'm actually quite happy with the yield I've got at the moment.
And why does that help with scab? The water is.
I'm sorry, Mick.
Why does you were saying the good dosing with water helped with scab as well? Why does that help?
Scab scabs a problem in hot, dry weather, particularly if your soil is slightly alkaline. It's bacterial infection that really gets going on the skin. So if you keep the soil moist and have higher levels of organic matter, which I have now with a compost, it tends to control it. But in organic growing, you're never getting rid of problems, you're managing them. That's how you have to think. And there's a bit of scab on them, but a lot less than it would have been if I'd have not irrigated.
Yeah, okay. And has the sort of weather had any other impact? Like, obviously, as you said, we've gone from a very, like, a 6-week drought to quite wet in the last 2 weeks, I suppose. Any kind of other effects of that particularly?
Carrots are doing badly, and they won't be very sweet. They tend to go more starchy in the hot weather and harder, so we won't have that. We won't really have the beautiful sweet baby carrots, you know, that they had enough in the hot weather. Other crops, no. It's a question of you know, trying to manage it, which is what I'm paid to do here, with appropriate irrigation. And sometimes, say with the salad crops, you're irrigating not necessarily just to keep them moist or keep the soil moist, irrigating to try and control flea beetle. If you grow rocket or Mizuna or whatever, you might see lots of little holes in the leaf, which isn't the end of the world. But obviously, going into the kitchen here onto people's table, we want it to be nice looking leaves. And if you keep the leaves moist by just sprinkling water around rather than really irrigating properly, flea beetle hates it damp. So I've been managing everything as best I can to control pests and diseases, you know, with resources I have available here.
Yeah, I found carrots were germination was patchy again because that very dry weather, it was hard to keep the seed bed keep it wet, like, so it was seemed to be patchy enough, but it's improved in the last couple of weeks, I guess, which is good.
Yeah, it's more traditional growing conditions now, and as you said, the first showing of blight on the potatoes. There's a good yield of our earlies. They're the only ones showing a little bit of blight at the moment already. So as soon as there's a fair bit of cover on the leaves, I'll just cut the leaves off. You don't have to throw them in a ditch or run away down the road with them. The blight on the leaves doesn't affect anything else after a day or two, so you just leave the leaves in, you know, by the plants. But if you cut them off, that stops the blight spreading onto the tubers. So that means you've got whatever you've got in terms of yield already, but it's not going to get damaged.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just pause on that and talk about that a little bit more. So for people like who maybe are dealing with this for the first time, what does blight look like first of all? On, like, you'll notice on the leaves first.
Yeah, it's little, usually little spots of brown first of all.
Yeah.
Often on the areas where the water hangs, like the tip of the leaf, because the blight spore can only enter the leaf of the potato. It comes in the air. You'll be breathing in blight spores all the time. It doesn't do you any harm. It does your potatoes. It goes in the air, and if the leaf is wet or moist for at least 12 hours and it's warm weather, so typical Irish summer, mild and moist, then the blight spore can enter the leaf, and then it slowly starts killing the leaf in little concentric circles, getting bigger and bigger, the brown spots. And when you have an awful lot of brown spots, that's time to cut the leaves off. I mean, we're organic, so we don't spray. You're allowed to spray copper as an organic producer, but there's two reasons why I don't spray. One is that, in my view, copper is a poison, which I don't want in the land and the soil. But the second, more realistic one is that copper is no longer effective. A number of years ago, I did a trial with an area sprayed with copper sulfate, bluestone, people know it as quite often, it's an area sprayed, an area unsprayed. The sprayed area died faster than the unsprayed area.
Wow.
So it's not worth it. But if you're not particularly organically minded, there are fungicides you can buy and you can spray. You have to spray usually in Irish summer every 7 to 10 days, and you'll keep the leaves on longer. But the best thing of all to do is grow a blight-resistant variety. I
Yeah.
don't particularly do that because the potatoes we grow are not the traditional main crop ones. They're the ones chef can't buy. So the blue ones, the red ones, the pink ones. And so I grow those and I accept the yield I have at the point when the leaves are badly damaged, which hopefully be about a month's time. And there'll
Yeah.
be a good yield underneath them by then.
So does when it affects the leaves originally, then would it starts to move down into the stems and down to the tubers eventually?
Yes, it doesn't go down through the stem. It goes down through the soil.
All right. So it like drips off the leaves effectively.
Yeah. So that's why you take the leaves off. And if you're growing a main crop potato you want to store over the winter, then what you do after cutting the leaves off, it leaves the potatoes in the ground for at least 3 weeks. Because if you pull them up before then, they have immature skins and there's lots of blight spores in the soil. And so the soft skins get infected with blight as you take them out. You can dig them to boil up for your tea that night. That's not a problem. But if you want to store them, you cut the leaves off and then leave them in the ground, and you want to store for at least 3 weeks. Okay. And all the blight spores have then been killed by the friendly fungi in the soil, and the skins have got hard. Interesting. Look, if you do spray with a fungicide, then that kills the good fungi in the soil. So the blight is more likely to run down onto your potatoes then, if they get blight. So.
Yeah, and like presumably the worry would be with that you're killing off the good fungi in the soil, but you're also wondering how much of that is in the potato and all of that as well. Like how much of the chemicals are in the potato.
I mean, we're totally in agreement on this. The GIY very much is organic, and we're a bit more than organic. For instance, I don't use some of the sprays I can, because you start messing with an ecosystem, you're playing with fire really. You knock one thing out and you can have a cascade of problems. So I suppose you could call it our way of growing is managing an ecosystem or controlled chaos or whatever to say, but we work with what's going on and I try and manage it and manipulate it. But we get lots of good veg out every year. But this, I think, is the final day when everything looks good, because pests and diseases are starting to move in. And so I noticed you were showing some people around yesterday, Mick, so they would have caught the last day when it looked really positive on the way through, you know?
Yeah, well, it's always the way, isn't it? Just before we move off potatoes, you mentioned blight-resistant varieties. Can you give some examples of those?
Yeah, there's varieties that come from Hungary, the Sarpo varieties. An interesting story with those, actually. There's Mera, there's Axona, and there's others as well, but it's a group of varieties. They were produced at the time of state control in Hungary, and private plots didn't get access to fertilizers and fungicides and things. So these varieties were developed so people could grow them without inputs, which obviously suits organic systems. They were brought over for about 15 years ago now initially. But I think certainly Fruit Hill Farm sell a variety of potato varieties, and they flag them as blight resistant or not. I think Mr. Middleton does as well, and we sell some other varieties here in the spring. So very, very good start if you want an ordinary main crop potato, is to buy a blight resistant variety, and that will usually give you a good crop without any spraying at all. But as I say, because of chef's requirement for the colourful ones that look nice on a plate and taste good, then I have to do the best I can to get the yield out for it.
Yeah. Is there any other kind of preventative measures you can take around blight, or is it just an inevitability that you're going to get
move to a drier climate?
Anything apart from that?
Yes, a few things you can do. I put mine at the row spacing is wider than often recommended.
Yeah.
And I do the same with my tomatoes because they also get blight. And I'll talk about blight control in tomatoes because you can do an awful lot there. But if you have air flowing around the potatoes, so slightly wider row spacing, then the leaves will dry on a dry morning and they won't remain wet for the 12 hours that is needed for the blight spores. I found that spraying with liquid seaweed gives them a sort of tonic and a boost and can hold the blight off a little bit longer. Some people seem to successfully use extract of horsetail, but I'm always very wary of seeing these things as good. If you extract a chemical, which is basically what you're doing from a plant, it's not really any different from a fungicide. It's a poison toxin, which putting on your garden. So I wouldn't necessarily do that. In tomatoes, your management to keep blight off is all about remembering that the leaves have to be moist for 12 hours to get the blight spore actually germinated on the leaf. So with those tomatoes, I always water from the base. I water once a week. So the atmosphere in the tunnel is dry, I ventilate well, and I put them at 60 centimetre spacing rather than the 45 centimetre spacing that's often recommended. There'll be a slight reduction in yield, but you'll keep blight at bay. And I remove the lower leaves quite vigorously. Well, I don't actually do vigorous leaf removal. I remove them fairly high up, which again keeps air moving around plants. And I don't usually have a blight problem. We always get a good crop of tomatoes here.
Yeah. So that point you made earlier on is interesting because I always thought when you remove leaves you do have to like put them in the brown bin, or you see mention of it, you have to burn them or whatever. But you're saying like the blight the spores can't sort of stay in the soil until next year and cause blight.
It can only stay on a potato. So no, it doesn't stay on the soil. I just remove the leaves and drop them around the plants.
Yeah.
No, if blight has got in, I might consider removing them. If there's a lot of blight, a little bit of blight wouldn't bother me at all, because it's in the air anyway. Welsh potato growers always blame the Irish for blight spores coming over the Irish Sea. I don't know whether it's true or not. The Gower Peninsula where they grow early potatoes, but
you're not allowed to blame the Irish for anything, Richard. You should know that by now.
I've been here long enough. I'm probably more Irish than the Irish themselves now, Mick. I don't know, but no, you can't. You don't have to worry about blight on the leaves. It's in a potato, so certainly it can be a good idea for a variety of reasons to dig all your potatoes out of the ground. When you're finished harvesting them. But it will come in on the air from neighbours.
Yeah,
or maybe if it's coming from the east, it comes from Wales.
Yeah, well, we can blame the Welsh. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's okay.
So, like for me, then in the situation I'm in, where the potatoes aren't a great size yet, it's a kind of you're trying to judge then leaving the leaves on long enough because presumably once you cut the leaves off, the potatoes won't grow anymore, right?
That's it, because the leaves are the food factory of a plant, obviously.
Yeah.
So they'll stop growing.
It's a balance now between leaving it long enough to let the spuds bulk out and not leaving it too long so that you get blight in the spuds themselves.
Yeah, do you have main crop in the garden as well?
No, not this year. Only early.
Well, I'd be very tempted to leave leaves until they die virtually then, because if they're early, you're not going to store them. So get maximum food value out of them and then harvest as you go, But traditionally, when you get about 50% leaf damage, that's when you cut the leaves off.
Right. Okay, that's a good rule of thumb. Yeah. All right. So if anyone has any questions about any of that, just pop it into the chat. But I think that's a fairly actually, hold on. Are people able to send that? Unmute send. Until I join. Yeah, no, I think that's a different thing. Sorry. Hopefully people are able to add questions in the chat. It's a bit strange that there aren't any there, but maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, moving on to the other kind of pests. So yeah, I was walking around the garden yesterday, Richard, and looking at the amount of bionet that we have down at the moment, and that's a sort of multi-purpose pest control, effectively, isn't it? Like to have a physical barrier over things like carrots and brassicas and things.
It ruins the garden aesthetically, but it means we get good crops. So if you come and walk around the veg patch, half of it is underneath net. But most of the problems we have are flying. Like the birds are the worst problem. Between the jackdaws, the rooks, and the pigeons, they'll annihilate most things. And the seagulls have a particular liking for newly sown peas. They're so clever, they worked out when I'm sowing peas, I realized last year, and they came and ate them all before I got them covered. But pigeons will just annihilate any brassica plant or any of the salad crops. And this year, quite annoyingly, they've worked out that red things can eat, because it's okay with red mustard and red lettuce. That was left uncovered. But I actually bought another roll the other week because suddenly my lettuce was being hammered, and so was the red mustard.
Yes, I noticed the other morning I was in the cafe and looked out at the TV garden, and there was 2 pigeons munching on the red salads in the raised beds there.
Yes, that's been written off now. I always was safe putting red salads in the TV garden there. So something else will have to go in there. Yeah. Hopefully they won't decide they can eat red chard, because that will decimate our chard crop for the winter if they do. So
yeah,
I keep telling JB to put pigeon on the menu. I think that will solve the problem. So,
so okay, so birds, it's going to work. It's going to help with birds. What else were we thinking? Obviously, the carrot root fly also a challenge.
And carrot root fly is a major problem here. Now, once you've grown carrots and related things for a few years, the fly numbers are so high that it's very hard to get a clean crop. But I even have to cover now parsnips and celeriac and celery, because if the carrot fly can't get in on carrots, they'll take something closely related. So that's all of that family get covered. For the cabbage family, the brassicas, you need to cover for obviously the pigeons, but for the white butterflies, and they will just make skeletons out of your cabbage plants, whatever, if you don't. So it's a very simple thing. You put a net down and it controls majority of problems we have here. Just have to remember to keep it down. You probably noticed here, anybody who's been, that where you have a cabbage plant or whatever that's popped out of the net, because the net moves a little bit, it'll be a skeleton with overnight when the pigeons move in first thing in the morning. So you have to keep your net down.
Talk to us a bit more about the carrot root fly, because I suspect there's can be misunderstandings about this. But is it true that they will like fly from miles around if they get the smell of carrot leaves, like if you're kind of thinning them out or whatever?
Yes, I mean, carrot flies only have to do one thing, which is mate and then find a carrot. That's it, really. It's not the most varied existence. So they're very good at the one thing they have to do, and they can smell carrots or something related from a very long way. I've seen figures of a mile, 2 miles. It's certainly a long way anyway. And a commercial carrot growers often like to move 5 miles away. They'll rent land around and move it around to try and keep one step ahead, because you get a sort of free year when carrot fly problems are quite low. Initially here we didn't have too much problem, and now growing carrots every year, problems built up to the extent that if there's any little hole in your net or whatever, enough will get in there to cause damage.
So what did they do? They land on the carrots on the foliage, is it? And lay
No,
their
they
eggs?
land on the soil and lay eggs in the soil by the carrots,
Right.
and the maggots wriggle out. If you want to use what's called systemic insecticides, I don't know whether they're actually available for amateurs anymore, but they work by the plant absorbs the insecticide, the carrot, and then it becomes poisonous to the maggots, and then you eat the carrots. So, I mean, that's an option for people, but not one I would personally want to take.
Yeah.
But they're not very good at flying, which seems a bit strange when that's all they have to do. But they find it hard to fly too far off the ground. Now, I've seen research from East England and from Switzerland, which says they cannot fly higher than about 60 centimeters.
Yeah.
And I'm not making this up, but Irish carrot flies are better flyers, probably because they come from a windier place. But certainly, if you have like a meter barrier around the edge, that will probably keep them out if you've not got too many.
So like the veg trugs that we have at the front of the building there, which are about a meter or waist height or so, if they had carrots in them, they mightn't be able to get in there.
They probably wouldn't. They would get the
Yeah.
impression sometimes lucky carrot fly get blown in the wind and blown up there. But yeah, you should be okay at that.
Are they visible as a fly? Like,
Yeah, they're a nondescript little brown thing. And commercial growers have traps, which sticky traps, which are coated with the sex hormone of the fly. So, as far as I'm aware, the males fly up and try and mate with the sticky thing and get the what's it stuck on the sticky board, and you count them, and there's a certain threshold when you get to go and do something about it. But not much point in us having them here because we don't spray anyway. So I just have to keep the net down and cross my fingers, really.
And they do serious damage to the carrots, don't they? It's that
Yeah,
sort of
they
black.
become virtually inedible.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can eat them, and certainly times when people were poorer, they would be eaten. And certainly they'd be fed to pigs and so on. But yeah, people aren't really prepared to do that now.
Yeah.
And people, I mean, hungry people are a lot less fussy. I know many years ago, I was in Central America, times of sort of chaos over there at the time, and people had beans that were more weevils than beans, and it didn't seem to bother anybody. They just were hungry, so they ate them. So I should imagine times past it would have been the same here, but we're very fussy now.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so and it's important to mention, I think, that the net you're talking about is a very specific type of net. Like, it's not like a fruit net that you'd associate with, putting over raspberries or whatever. It's a very fine
Extremely
mesh.
fine, yes, to keep them out. Various names: Enviromesh, Bionet. We sometimes sell it in the shop here. I'm going to encourage them to have some, because people come around and see it in the garden here. So it'd be nice to have it for sale. Fruit Hill Farm, Mr. Middleton, they're all people who would sell them if you buy them online.
Yeah.
So it's specifically insect mesh. Yes, we also have bird mesh on the fruit, stop blackbirds and so on eating our strawberries and so on, which are coming off in large quantities now. But that wouldn't keep small insects out. So
yeah, and like you're not just kind of draping it over the plants. You're also kind of making sure it's like pinned down at the sides or covered with stones or whatever to make sure they can't.
As you know, we have so many rocks here in the garden, never-ending supply, that we've never needed to buy pins to keep it down. We have a never-ending supply of little rocks, so we use those. But if you have soil that's less awkward to manage than ours, then you can buy pins to keep it down. Or what's quite handy is shopping bags filled with a bit of sand or soil. You can use those, or Or you can bury it. The most effective way of making sure things like carrot fly can't get in is put soil over it. But the problem is you have to lift it up every few weeks for weeding or thinning or whatever. So that could be a technique maybe you did once you decided doing your final weeding, just bury it all the way around in soil.
Yeah.
Or old planks are very handy because they, go hold the way along the edge and keep it a little bit safer for flies.
What about companion planting? You hear that talked about sometimes as a carrot root fly kind of control, but I'd be skeptical about it.
Yeah, if you've got a very small population, then growing something like garlic or onions next to them can confuse the carrot fly. But if you have a large population and you're growing a substantial number of carrots, any more than a little row really, then they'll find a way in. As I say, they only have to do one thing, and they're pretty good at that. So
yeah, okay, all right. So then you mentioned the cabbage white butterfly, which is the other big problem. Also, similarly, it's laying eggs on the leaves. The eggs turn into caterpillars, and the caterpillars munch on your brassicas, basically. So that's again same approach, isn't it? With bayonet or something to keep them off.
yes,
A wider net still won't potentially keep them out.
They tend to be able to lay through it unless you make a superb tent. They also have the ability to fold the wings to some extent, and they can get through remarkably small holes. So if you want to go to the trouble of getting a very sort of fine mesh, normal netting, and making a tent, then you might be able to keep them off. But it's simpler just to drape the bayonet over. Bayonet is only one type of net. There's various names for it. You just drape it over the plants, and it's much easier done. I don't have to make a tent then.
And it's light enough that as they grow, they'll just push up the way. It doesn't.
Yes, it can push plants over a bit. I noticed some of the Brussels sprouts, which are undercover, are growing slightly horizontally because they've been pushed down a bit, but it doesn't really matter. They'll still produce Brussels sprouts for the Christmas meals here. So
yeah, and so the cabbage white, it'll lay its eggs on any. Is it only brassicas it'll do it on, or is it any?
There's 2 or 3 different species involved, and I don't remember which one it is now. I think it's the small white. Will lay on other things. I've seen them eating onion leaves, for instance. But it's basically the cabbage family, but they will expand a little bit if there's no cabbages available.
Yeah, okay. So all of the cabbages, kales, cauliflowers, Brussels sprouts, sprout and broccoli, all that family are a problem.
They're all difficult to grow organically in many ways because everything wants to eat a cabbage apart from children. I think there's all the way through there's pests and diseases trying to attack them.
Yeah, okay. So that's the key thing there. Anything else kind of, I suppose most of those types of plants we've mentioned there would be kind of, similar stage at the moment. Is there anything else in terms of, I find when I put the net over them, I'm inclined to forget about them a bit maybe, and you do need to sort of take it off occasionally for weeding and
well, that's your age, Mick. You're starting to get a bit forgetful there. No, it is. A mantra I had actually sometimes with staff, but don't forget what's under the net. It's easy to do. It's also a little bit fiddly to take it off. So have a look under. It's quite nice to see your plants are getting on as well. Yeah, you can leave them and weeds can take a hold or whatever. So keep flicking the net off. But with the carrot fly, when you're doing something like thinning or weeding, they'll smell it. So if you possibly can, do it on a windy, blustery day because don't want to fly in those sort of conditions. But if that's not possible, and it certainly wasn't possible for me with our prolonged hot sunny period, I only opened a certain bit and I closed it behind me. Flipped the net off and then.
Wow! Would they really be that quick like that?
We have
If you
so
took
many
the-
here now, yes. Because
Right.
if you've got a small population, the odd one finding its way in is not the end of the world. If you've got a very large population, even if only 1% find you on that day, that can be enough to cause a lot of damage, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't wash either for a week beforehand, so my smell puts the flies off as well.
I thought that you just did that all the time. I didn't realize that was a.
Oh yeah, but that's a technical excuse for it then, isn't it? So.
So there's a question there then about tomatoes. My windowsill tomatoes don't have any flowers yet. Should they have flowers by now?
It depends how big they are. Generally, they produce 3 leaves and start producing flowers.
Yeah.
So if they've got more than 3 leaves and haven't produced flowers, it could be because they aren't getting enough sunlight in your windowsill. They love lots of sunlight, so ideally a full south-facing window is the best for them.
Yeah.
And make sure they're in a really big pot. I would have them in a pot of at least like a 2-gallon bucket, you know, a 10-litre pot minimum, I would think.
Yeah, and so that's an interesting point about like it's never as bright, even in a bright room, like a really bright room with lots of windows. It's never quite as bright as it is outside, sure.
It isn't. And tomatoes are quite a popular one for people to go on windowsills, but they're not ideal because if they're not getting enough sunlight, they won't bother doing anything useful. I mean, I know Chef has experimented with tomato leaves on the menu, but that's Chef here. They're not normally eaten. You know, we want the fruit. You're probably much better off with a tray of salads or leafy herbs like basil or something.
Yeah.
Because they produce something even if they're not got ideal growing conditions.
Yeah.
Because the leaves are what you're after. So I think tomatoes are probably a bit beyond unless you have a beautiful south-facing full picture window.
Yeah. Actually, I was at an event in the north last weekend or the weekend before that Klaus was at, Klaus Leitenberger, and he was talking about the old sort of wisdom was that the leaves of tomato plants are poisonous, but he found something somewhere about side shoots of tomatoes as being potentially very good for you to eat and quite tasty. So I don't know if you've ever.
That was JB's research, our chef here. Yeah, he put them on an experimental menu a year or 2 ago. I remember. They're quite tasty. But I mean, I should imagine it's the young leaves, and they're probably like a lot of these things have slight amounts of toxin in. You know, that's normal in your diet, like potatoes. Any stored potato will have a fair bit of toxin in, but a small amount of natural toxins are probably quite good for your body, actually. It's always dose related.
Yeah.
Hippocrates used to say the poison is in the dose, isn't it? Which is right to some extent, but I wouldn't recommend necessarily people go and boil up a load of tomato leaves. Do a bit of research first. You're going to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, we're up sort of almost to the end of our time, Richard. But we covered sort of the carrot root fly, birds, cabbage white, butterflies, and so on. Any other pests? I noticed we seem to have a cat in the garden in Grow HQ now, which is not something I've seen before. Have we? How big a pest can cats be?
Well, seed beds are toilets to a cat. That's the main problem.
Yeah.
I mean, he's quite useful because he takes some birds out as well, along with the foxes. A lot of the holes actually are dug by foxes here, but they have a real liking for eating pigeons, so they're certainly very welcome in my garden. But yeah, bayonetic, you know, bit of a one-trick pony today. Covering any seed bed with bayonet prevents the cats doing what cats do on them. Like the salad beds, I would net from the beginning because obviously we don't want cat poo anywhere near our salads. So I net them from the beginning to keep them out.
I've heard people say, I don't have cats at home, so I've never tried this, but a rag soaked in vinegar turns cats off, apparently.
It might do. I find buying it's a bit easier.
Yeah,
I'm very
probably,
happy
that's
to
true.
come round because, you know, well, it's the neighbours here. A couple of very nice, well-fed looking tomcats come round the garden. But as I say, they'll keep some of the birds in check, and if we have any mice running around, they'll probably keep those in check as well. So
Yeah,
no problem
okay.
there.
Okay, thanks a million, Richard. Just to say to everybody, loads more information on the GIY website, particularly in the resources section. There's a whole bank of videos there on our veg directory and lots of other resources. So we'll be back at the end of July for another chat. And until then, happy growing, everyone, and we'll talk to you again. Thanks a million, Richard, and have a good afternoon there. Take care, everyone. Thank you.